Non-Diet Yogi podcast, where we explore yoga, earth-based living and gentle nutrition through a non-diet lens. I'm your host, Casey Conroy, non-diet dietitian and a yoga teacher, and this is episode 8, Inclusivity, Rage and Other Forms of Kindness, Merging Yoga and Dietetics with Fiona Sutherland. Now, this episode was kind of like a big, satisfying, delicious meal, a mixture of pretty big topics that, whilst profound and important, was pleasantly digestible, as I'm hoping you will find too. Fiona is a big picture educator and a really compassionate and passionate educator at that. My intention in this episode was to cover some common ground between non-diet dietetics and teaching yoga. But Fi's answers were deep dives into wider ranging issues than I expected. So she talks about social justice, systems of power and privilege, and how this all trickles down into our work as dietitians and yoga teachers. And also how it can and does impact our clients, our students, and ourselves. In this episode, we talk about how Fiona went from pub-going uni student to eating disorders specialist and yoga teacher. The book that pivoted both Fiona's and my own trajectory in terms of our dietetic career pathway. Fiona's yoga teaching as embodied movement versus a fitness class. The 3 C's, care, consent and choice, as essential factors in being inclusive dietitians, inclusive yoga teachers and inclusive humans. Why doing the work doesn't always feel good. What determines whether the yoga we practice will help or hinder healing from eating disorders, disordered eating and body image issues. Healthsplaining, healthism and the actual determinants of health. We don't sit separately from harm. The way we show up in the world really matters. Thin privilege, weight bias, and systematic oppression. Working with clients who want to lose weight and what people might be actually looking for when they pursue weight loss. Some of the hundreds of evidence-based things a non-diet dietitians can do that isn't giving out a meal plan. The power of the question, I wonder if you're eating enough. And the pervasive expectation on women and femmes to be nice and never angry, and how mindfulness is not the same as niceness. So yeah, and there's even more than that. Fiona's amazing. She was probably my first in real life teacher, like real teacher in the non-diet approach. And since meeting her maybe 8 or so years ago, I've taken several of her courses, starting with her incredible 2-day in-person training in the non-diet approach with Fiona Willer, who is another legend in the HAES and non-diet dietetics world, and they still run this training to this day. I've since done Fiona's eating disorders in sports and body image online workshops and seminars, and from what I've found, everything she does is really high quality. And she presents it in such a warm and yet engaging way. And her style of teachings just really facilitated my falling in love with the non-diet approach. So a quick bio. Fiona Sutherland is an accredited practicing dietitian and director of both the Mindful Dietitian and Body Positive Australia. She has been practicing for over 15 years, primarily in the areas of eating behaviour, eating disorders, body image, sports nutrition and education. Fiona is a committed non-diet dietitian and is passionate about supporting and educating health professionals to develop skills and insight into working with clients from a weight-inclusive, heart-centred lens. She's also the host of the podcast The Mindful Dietitian and a sports dietitian working with emerging professional dancers at the Australian Ballet School. She is also a dedicated mindfulness practitioner and yoga teacher, bringing a particular emphasis on mindful eating and the intersection of food environment, eating psychology and body image into her work and training. She's a guest lecturer within the Melbourne-based dietetics courses across 4 universities, and she is passionate about building community, developing meaningful collaborations, and sharing our collective messages around food and body peace. I also just wanted to mention that at the moment, with everyone going through the global pandemic that is COVID-19, I'm really doing my absolute best to get these podcast episodes out. I aim for 2 per month, 1 a fortnight, but sometimes it might only be 1 a month. This last month of March, I've spent most of my time doing an amazing yoga teacher training overseas with my family. We went to Bali, which was incredible and also extremely intense. It was the first time I'd travelled overseas since having children. The last time I'd been to Bali was when I was actually pregnant with Archie and had found out the day before I was due to fly out to teach a retreat. But yeah, so in summary, it was amazing, but also really intense, especially by the time we were to come home with everything that was going on in the airports, and coming home to a really different way of life, of course, here in Australia has been interesting. So I just wanted to remind you that, of course, in these very strange times, we're all trying to find ways to make do, and the impact on COVID in particular on yoga teachers has been significant in that we really need to move to online platforms in order to keep teaching. And I'll be honest, I'm struggling with that, even though I do make a podcast, but just generally, like everyone else, struggling with the changes and trying to make ends meet with these new restrictions on one-on-one client work and also group client work, which are really that's the only kind of work I do. So to keep this podcast going, there is a non-diet yogi podcast Patreon where for the lowest tier, which is just $2 a month, $2.90 or so Australian, I believe, you can access bonus audios, PDF resources, yoga nidras. There's a yoga nidra from our amazing guest Chandrika Gibson up there, which is just beautiful. Giveaways, coupon codes, all kinds of things from our past guests. The library is growing. So really, if there's any way that you have the capacity to support in a financial way, that $2 a month would mean so much to me, just in terms of being able to continue this podcast. So thank you. So last thing before I play the episode or the interview, there's just a little trigger warning in this one. We do talk about calories and numbers at one point. It's just a really small section. And as Fiona says, it's in the service of freedom. But just giving you a heads up, for the last quarter or so of this episode, from about the 1 hour and 2 minutes, 1 hour, 3 minutes mark onwards, from there for a couple of minutes after, there'll be a bit of calorie talk. I know you're going to love this interview with Fiona, so here it is. Hi, Fiona, and welcome to the Non-Diet Yogi podcast. It is amazing to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Casey. It's awesome to be able to, be one of your guests for this amazing series.
Yay. Now, Fiona, this is a kind of pivotal moment for me because we met quite a few years back now at a workshop with Linda Bacon, and you were you were definitely one of the first teachers, probably the most pivotal teacher I've had in the kind of liberating and exciting world that is non-diet and weight-inclusive practice. And I think that your podcast, The Mindful Dietitian, was probably the first Haze podcast I ever tuned into. And now you are a jet-setting international non-diet rock star sharing your offerings all over the world. So, it's just really cool to have you here, Fee. And I just really want to thank you for all the work that you've put out into the world. And, from what I've done and from what I've witnessed as I've followed you and learnt from you, everything that you put out is just really high quality. Your courses and your conferences, both online and person, everything you do is just gold. So
just wanted to thank you for that.
Oh, thanks, Case. I really appreciate that. And if I could just wheel my kids in at this point in time, that would be great, because actually the truth is they think I'm very, very bossy and quite unfair. So
Wow.
I appreciate that. I will take that.
Well, okay, you're not the only one. I'll just say that.
Yep.
Fee, do you think you could tell the listeners a little bit about what led you to become a dietitian who specializes in eating disorders and body image, and now a yoga teacher? What got you there?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Case, and thanks for asking. So I'll kind of take us a short walk through my kind of career trajectory, and that is that the truth is I had a friend at uni when I did my undergraduate science degree at Melbourne University, whose parents were both dietitians, and she was going on to train to do her master's in dietetics. And I literally thought, that sounds good. And so I applied and got in, which was actually a real surprise, to be honest, because I mean, in my science degree, I wasn't the most quote unquote dedicated of students. Like, I probably saw more of the pub than the library. Let's put it that way. Yes, I'm sure I'm not alone in that.
Definitely
But
not.
yeah, but as I kind of went into dietetics, I actually became really interested in it. And at that point in time, I had no interest at all in eating disorders, in kind of the psychology of eating, and body image and things like that. I certainly had a background of some intermittent, I guess, food and body concerns myself, particularly through my adolescent years. And although I was never diagnosed with an eating disorder, I certainly can identify that I had some strong biases, I guess, for and against particular bodies, which I've only, which only through my own kind of insight-oriented work has really become, much more obvious to me, and the way that has influenced, the course of my career. But I really started off in clinical practice, and then found myself needing a job, and found myself in a weight loss practice. And I didn't, now I look back and I'm like, but, as a graduate, after doing some clinical work, and then, that was overseas, and then came back, needed a job. And the truth is, I kind of was like, yeah, this is all good. This is what I've been trained to do. Right. And then, what actually ended up happening is that I met a lot of people who were in a lot of pain. They were really suffering at the hands of what I now know as, or what we now name as diet culture, what we now name as fat phobia, weight stigma, transphobia, homophobia, all these different ways that we show up in the world, which we're led to believe is unacceptable and should be changed, and that we need to be spending, all our time and energy and resources on fixing ourselves. So the core of that is I met a lot of people really suffering in pain, and it really struck me as a young, highly privileged, white, cis-het, educated femme, and really, caused me a lot of unrest. I guess that's the best word for it. And then kind of skip forward a little bit. I then that was a part-time job, and I did need to supplement my income, and ended up applying for a job in eating disorders. And, skip forward, say maybe 6 months or so, and I realized that there was no irony in the two fields of work that I was spending most of my time in. And that was, I was hearing the same story, and I was left feeling very perplexed and feeling very confused, actually. And and quite know where to take it. And I felt even more deeply, unrested, and yeah, I was searching for answers, really, in lots of ways. And of course, in our profession, we are taught to look for answers, and we're taught to solve that problem. Even when that problem is, kind of, a cultural problem that lies, well outside of ourselves as well as inside of ourselves. So luckily for me at the time, I stumbled across a very important book, and it's called If Not Dieting, Then What, by Dr. Rick Korsman, who was just pivotal in my learning and in my pivoting, the shifting of my awareness, I guess, of my consciousness. And within a month, I had resigned from the weight loss practice and had applied for more hours in the eating disorders clinic I was working in. So from there, I guess I really immersed myself in eating disorders and the spectrum of disordered eating. And also at this time, I was also qualified as a sports dietitian, so working with athletes. And again, was hearing these some of these really similar stories. And so I began to be very, very interested in the intersection of sport and movement, and then in the spectrum of disordered eating. And up one end, we have what we name as clinical eating disorders. And I think what's important to remember, and what I didn't really realize at the time, is that, what we name as clinical eating disorders are really, they're indicative just of severity more than anything else. But that, disordered eating attitudes and behaviors exist in all of us in lots of ways. And that particularly people seeking out healthcare, will often be experiencing some sort of disordered eating beliefs, attitudes, behaviours, as a result of, this very messed up culture in which we live. And that a lot of those people also turn up in our yoga classes as well. People who are seeking some peace, who are seeking, quote unquote health, whatever that means. So we could dive into that if you like. But because I know you have thoughts on this as well, Case. But I only did my yoga teacher training about 5 years ago, so it's fairly recent for me. But what I became really interested in was really embodied practice, and really I actually did my yoga teacher training not with the intention of actually teaching classes. I mean, I have ended up teaching, but my intention really was to study philosophy and to study embodied movement. And I chose very carefully my yoga teacher training so that it wasn't going to be another version of, I don't know, HIIT classes or CrossFit, something like that. I just think sometimes our yoga teaching turns into another fitness thing as opposed to, really honoring the philosophy and history of yoga. And I really didn't want to be enacting that, especially how it intersects with diet culture in all these really complex ways. So I don't know, that kind of brings us where we are today. And that is, I really am now immersed in teaching education, as you said, and bringing that to as many people as possible. So I really appreciate you having me and being able to speak to other people as well.
Oh my goodness, Fee, that was just the most amazing comprehensive and yet succinct answer. Thank you so much for sharing not only your pathway to how you got to where you are now, but also the personal experiences behind it. You mentioned right at the start how it was only through your own insight orientated work that you saw where your weight biases and body biases were coming into the picture. And it was just really touching actually to hear you talk about how you notice that pain and that suffering in clients in all your different jobs, and how that compassion that it sounds like you had for them led to your feeling this unrest and really recognizing your privilege and then going, okay, well, what am I going to do about this? And I also think it's so cool how the book that seemed to be pivotal for you was If Not Dieting, Then What, by Dr. Rick Korsman, because it was the same book that did it for me.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's probably how our conversations even got started.
Yes. Yeah, that was such a short, to the point, easy but powerful little read. So thank you, Dr. Rick Korsman.
He's awesome.
Wow. So in what you've said, like that was a Pandora's box opening big time. And there's towards the end, you were starting to talk about embodied practice. And that kind of leads me to my next question of what do you think, you're a dual qualified dietitian, yoga teacher, and I'm seeing more and more of us folks kind of coming out of the woodworks. And I think it's really cool because, as you touched on, there is so much common ground between the two, especially non-diet nutrition professionals, Hayes nutrition professionals, and yoga teachers. You talked about that yoga philosophy being a really big part of why you did a teacher training in the first place. So I'm just wondering, Fee, what do you think are the biggest kind of areas of crossover between non-diet dietetics and teaching yoga from your vantage point? Where do you think one bleeds into the other?
Yes. Okay. So I have given this some thought. Because I don't want to appear as if, oh, I have this at the ready. I have it at the ready because I've actually given it some thought, and why it's so important to me. Why this intersection is so important. So there are a couple of things. The first is that, if we are wanting to be inclusive dietitians and inclusive yoga teachers and be welcoming to people in all bodies, how we show up in the world, then there are a couple of things that are incredibly important for us to remember. And some of the work of a trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed yoga has really helped me to understand this a little bit more clearly and a little bit more deeply. So one of the I guess core aspects of both trauma-informed yoga, and I don't know whether I'd even call it just trauma-informed yoga. I believe just yoga in general. And also healthcare, and you and I are kind of talking more specifically about dietetic practice, and that is the issues of consent and choice. So I'm a big believer in yoga of seeking consent regularly throughout class, whether that is for kind of a hands-on type of adjustment work, or that's the obvious one, right? That's the one that yoga teachers think of a lot, is seeking consent for adjustment. And by the way, I have been in a lot of yoga classes with lovely, wonderful, very kind teachers who don't seek consent. So these two things don't lie exclusive. You can be lovely, kind, very experienced and still not seek consent. So I think we need to probably stop resting on being caring and nice and start being a little bit more explicit with the seeking of our consent, because if I'm noticing it, then your other yoga participants are also noticing it. So what I mean by consent and choice is offering people options through our language. So in both yoga and dietetics, we might use, well, I just did it then. I just said, we might, we might offer blah, 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 or, notice how it feels if, rather than, rather than a classic kind of yoga cue where, for example, just say you're in Baddha Konasana and your kind of your next kind of pose is more, in a forward fold or something like that, but Baddha Konasana forward, and taking a little bit of a forward fold, that you might be very careful, or be not careful, considerate. Consider it with your words in your cueing, so that you're using lots of mights, be curious about, notice, I wonder how, it might feel good to blah, 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 and using all these words offers choice, and it also invites consent. And so consent doesn't just exist between the health professional and the client, nor does it just exist between the yoga teacher and the participants, or our class members. It exists also within ourselves as well. So that when we are inviting ourselves into consent, inviting our whole selves into the room, there is there is a sense of spaciousness there, where if there is any hesitation within ourselves, that we're not forcing it, and nor are we setting up perfectionistic expectations for ourselves that I have to do this because the teacher has said, has instructed me to. There is a gentleness and a spaciousness in offering even ourselves consent, even offering choice to ourselves. So if the teacher gives a cue, that we are able to offer choice to ourselves, even if the teacher is or is not explicit about choice. So I talk a lot about these, the 3 C's. So care, consent, and choice, I think are kind of where my two kind of career areas, I guess, whatever they are, they intersect quite closely. And I'm a big fan of language. I'm a big fan of acronyms, and so the 3 C's work really well for me when I'm explaining this, because I think it kind of brings it all kind of into the core tenets of yoga, and some of the core tenets of being just a good human, really, and an ethical healthcare practitioner.
Oh my gosh, so much gold in everything you just said, Fee. The 3 C's, yeah, I love that. The care, consent, and choice, because if we can bring those 3 things into our work as yoga teachers, dietitians, health professionals, just humans, as you said, then wow, what an expansive kind of space we're opening up, not just for our students, our clients, as you mentioned, but also for ourselves. It can be quite revolutionary, actually, I think, if we can really begin to invite or play with, as you said, the way that we use our language. So we might, or be curious about and notice. And I've noticed, just to use this language, that when I do remember to use this kind of option focused language and think about consent in my classes, it feels really good. It feels good for me as a teacher, to create that space for people, to not have to be the expert on their bodies, to actually hand over that expertise. Well, it was never mine to start with, to remind others that, hey, actually, you know, you pretty much have a much better idea of what's going to work for you. So in using that care and that consent and that choice through my language, I think it really builds a lot of trust, actually.
I agree so much. And I think the trust then extends, it's this dynamic process. If we can imagine it like a Venn diagram, so there's us and our experience, and then there's our class members or our clients and their experience, and then there's the shared experience in the middle, and that is the dynamic of being a human. We don't exist in isolation, we exist in community, and we exist in dynamic. And so when we can bring more spaciousness and more consent and choice ourselves, then that is inevitably going to be shared with others in a way that invites them to lean into these kind of experiences. And the one thing that I have certainly found personally, both as a class participant, as a teacher, and as in my role as health professional, is that it feels as though on the surface that consent and choice are these lovely things, and look, they are. And my experience has been that when I invite myself into a place of choice, and for example, I take child's pose rather than another round of sun salutation, I there is a part of me, like for example, I notice my comparison mind pops up. So it's not like, oh, look at me being so compassionate towards myself, and being in child's pose, and blah blah blah. It's also that that is part of my experience, but then the other part of my experience is also like my comparison mind pops up and then goes, oh, look, and everyone else is taking the vinyasa. Yeah, good, yeah, type
Mm.
of thing. So I think that that's part of it too, is that we don't have expectations that, when we offer ourselves permission to do things, that it actually feels good, because some of the time it actually does not feel good. It does not feel good at all. It feels very grating, and it feels really tricky, because we're actually building new neural pathways, and we're doing things differently. And anytime we do things differently, even in the service of our values, even in the service of compassion and care, it can feel weird and hard at first. So I just wanted to add that. So I don't want people to lead people to believe that, oh, this will feel really good, because I tell you what, it doesn't always.
Oh my gosh. Yes, that's such a good point. And that noticing of, the discomfort, the not feeling quite good and feeling quite grating, actually, as you said, that is the practice. That is part of it. And I would almost say, like, that's actually the crux. That's the good stuff right there. Well, not the good stuff, but the stuff that really nails what yoga is about.
That's right.
In terms of, knowing the self, and getting comfortable with discomfort. That's it right there. So yeah, thank you for adding that, Fee. That actually gives me a lot to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I guess continuing to walk down this road of this, I love the Venn diagram image, by the way. I love my little imaginary diagrams. So going down this road a bit further of this crossover between, health professional work and yoga work, I'm just thinking about more specifically eating disorders, disordered eating, and body dysmorphia. So, in my work so far, I've seen yoga really facilitate healing from an eating disorder for some people. And I've also seen yoga culture and diet culture, and the way those two are kind of intertwined, I've seen that stuff have the opposite kind of undesirable effect of exacerbating body and food issues in yoga practitioners and yoga teachers. Sophie, I'm just wondering, how do you think that yoga can support folks who are experiencing eating disorders or disordered eating and body dysmorphia, which, you said before are all on a spectrum and kind of pretty much impacts almost all of us? How can people traverse, the kind of choppy seas of yoga culture to find a safe yoga practice, a safe shore that really allows them to heal rather than fall more deeply into food and body concern?
Yes. All right.
Big one, I
So
know.
where do we start? I think one of the things to first address is that we become willing, and we have the courage to that we're willing to look at what are our tendencies. I'll give you an example, because I'm big on examples. So, for example, somebody who has an eating disorder which manifests in maybe drive, and maybe more in restrictive eating and cutting out food groups and so forth, they're probably going to be more drawn to a more yang, high intensity, maybe hot, fast flow type of yoga, if that makes sense. Because our ego loves to support its own purpose, right? And we don't as humans, we don't like feeling uncomfortable. We'll tend to move in the direction of what feels good. And for a lot of people who experience quite significant kind of body image dissatisfaction and disordered eating, that they will tend to pursue a style of yoga which matches that, which matches the drive, which matches the heat, which matches a lot of the underlying drivers of the eating disorder. And so one of the things to be alert for, I guess, is that, if we are choosing a style of yoga or even a teacher which whose teaching manifests in a very same way as the eating disorder. And ironically, we're usually not going to notice it because it usually will feel good. Whereas for somebody that has more of a driven type of maybe personality type, really relates to being highly perfectionistic, and maybe black and white thinking, it's got to be this or it's don't bother doing it at all type thing. Something like restorative or maybe yin class, given that they're different types of classes. They have different goals, I guess, different aims, different foundations, different teaching kind of foundations. That they are going to be much more challenging, heaps more challenging, because it's asking us to bring a different part of ourselves into the room. And so there's that side of things where, for example, in yoga for eating disorders, it is unusual that, for example, we use a lot of heat. It is unusual that we use a lot of fast flowing movement, a lot of fast flow vinyasa, or a lot of the strong stuff. We are much more likely to use more embodied, mindful, slow flow, or yin, or a restorative, actually, really, because of the way that the nervous system really gets fired off with high intensity kind of thoughts and emotions and experiences. We really want to be working on the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, to be clearer, through maybe some more restorative, slower, embodied type of movement, which is quite deliberate. So I'm not sure whether that was helpful or not, but that's, kind of like, this is what we feel drawn to when we have this experience, and then this is what might help us actually kind of crawl our way out of the mess, so to speak.
Wow, Fee, yes, all of that. That what you just said actually does hit very close to home, because this is a bit vulnerable to say, but I have experienced, very disordered eating and, orthorexia, and even something kind of resembling anorexia in my younger years. And I've always been drawn to that really yang, fast vinyasa, strong classes. And to be totally honest, I still am. I'm a recovering perfectionist. And I was listening to your podcast the other day about, are we ever really recovered, with the wonderful guest. I can't quite remember her name right now.
Oh yeah, Andrea Lamar.
Yes. And I was just oh my God, there's so much truth to that. And how you just were speaking about, look, knowing what your tendencies are and knowing what feels comfortable and what feels good, and letting that guide you towards just being more aware of our tendencies. And it's probably been not for that long, but maybe the last 6 months that I've really intentionally, I feel like I've, recovered from orthorexia now, although, still get little twinges of bad body image thoughts and that kind of thing. But
You're a human. You're a human. My gosh. Yeah, of course.
Thank you for validating me there. But yeah, since I've moved up to the sunny coast, I've actually started attending a yoga class where almost all of the other students are quite a lot older than me. It's a very slow flow kind of class. The teacher is much older. There's a lot of restorative, a lot of yin to it. And I can notice and I feel my discomfort with that. And I also notice how, again, that spaciousness and expansiveness I feel afterwards, with that down regulation of the nervous system, tapping into parasympathetic nervous system mode, and how that actually, as kind of new as it feels at this stage in my life, also I know that this is good for me. So, knowing our tendencies, I think, is really important. So thank you for pointing that out. That just, hits close to home.
Yeah, of course. And it doesn't mean, for example, I can never do fast flow vinyasa. I must never do blah blah blah. That's not what that means. Like we don't want to be enacting the very same structures that we're aiming to dismantle. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. Yep.
So we don't
Oh,
need to
yeah.
be dichotomous about it.
No, but just knowing your tendencies and being aware.
Yeah, being aware. That's it. Exactly.
Yeah, because I still do love me a strong yoga class. And
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, Fee, thank you for that. I'm just going to slightly shift gears now because I want to talk about something that you have spoken and written about, on your blog and on your own podcast, and that is healthsplaining. Can you talk to the listeners about healthsplaining, what it is, and how do both dietitians and yoga teachers and other health practitioners fall into the healthsplaining trap, and how can we do better?
Yeah, excellent. And thank you for asking. So, as you are well aware, I mean, one thing that Casey, that you and I share in common, and I'm sure this comes across very clearly to your listeners, if they have been consuming your other podcast episodes, and that you and I can get pretty fired up about stuff. And to this day, your article about the what was the title of feminist, the empowered, my God,
the sexy, spiritual, successful woman ideal.
Correct, thank you. I was like, what were those words? This is just awesome. So this is a little bit about that too, but I know you and I can we can get kind of fired up about this stuff, which is I think it's helpful at times. All right, so let's bring it back. Yes, at times, exactly. So let's bring it back to healthsplaining. It's a completely made up word, by the way, and I drew it from mansplaining, which is where a man speaks up, maybe in lieu of or over a woman, basically repeating what she just said, which is really, it's a communication product of patriarchy, really, where men feel entitled to be taking up the space of women and femmes in a way that enacts power structures. So with that in mind, I was thinking about healthsplaining and thinking about how we name and label quote unquote health in a way that has it perceived that some people know more about health than others. And as it turns out, in our culture, that would be, predominantly white cis het people, not just men, but people, quote unquote educated, perhaps self-educated in some, ways, which is fine too. That are able-bodied, that are thin, that that present themselves in particular ways in the world, and that have a specific way of defining health. So basically, healthsplaining is the ways that we define health, quote unquote health, whilst ignoring things like systems of power and privilege, and all the factors which actually make up most of what can determine our health. So it was really interesting. The most recent research done internationally shows that that nutrition and exercise, which is which are predominantly the behaviors that are focused on when it comes to quote unquote health, actually make up way less than 50% of our overall health and well-being, which is, I mean, I personally find this unsurprising now. So factors such as poverty, factors such as violence and trauma, and a lot, not only what we might regard as pathological trauma like PTSD or complex trauma, but then also intergenerational trauma, and the traumas of being a woman in this world today, and the traumas of dieting and diet culture. So all of these, and being stigmatized and oppressed being part of a marginalized community. So all these are factors which very much get ignored when a thin white yogi is perched upon a beautiful beachside location with a berry smoothie in hand, or kale smoothie, as the case may be. So this is really healthism in a nutshell, when we're not talking about poverty, when we're not talking about racism, when we're not talking about fat phobia, but we're doing a dancer pose and holding an upturned acai bowl on the shores of Byron Bay. We are enacting healthism, and we are directly hurting people by that. And I know that's really confronting. Like, people are like, I'm allowed to hold an acai bowl, I'm allowed to, do a dancer pose and do all this stuff, and I'm thin because I work at it, and I'm thin because this is my genetics. And look, that can all be fine. Fine. And
the end.
Yeah, and we really have to be aware that we don't sit separately from harm. We don't. We are right in there, and unless we stay conscious and aware and awake and alert to the ways in which those of us, and I include myself in this, us who are highly privileged, the way that we show up in the world really matters. And for yoga teachers and dietitians, what I'm specifically talking about is not only how we speak and how we act in the world, but also imagery. So are we soaking our Instagram full of pictures of ourselves in our thin, white, gorgeous yoga clothes, showing healthy, quote unquote healthy food, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying never do that. What I'm saying is, if we're aiming to actually make meaningful change in the world, we need to be more thoughtful, we need to be more deliberate, and we need to really more deeply understand how healthism shows up in the world and directly impacts and hurts people. And that's not the people that we want to be. We don't want to be hurtful. We want to be ahimsa, right?
Yes,
and that's one
of ahimsa.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about that side of things.
Amen. Amen to that.
Amen in all genders.
Yeah, that's it, totally. Oh wow, I'm just gonna marinate in that. That was, yeah. So yeah, I love how you brought the healthism part into that, and you've kind of just answered my next question actually, which was about body shaming and thin privilege. Because as you just mentioned, we especially as white, or can pass as white, in my case, cis het so-called educated people, we can do harm if we are not aware of where we are sitting. If we're not aware of our privilege, we can hurt people. Although it's not intentional, we can still very much hurt people. And that can be confronting, but I also think it's incredibly important to think about, because it will show up in our work as dietitians, as yoga teachers, as whatever field of work we're in, especially if it's in health professions. So thank you for giving that gem of advice about how we can navigate that. And I love also, Fee, how you touched on that kind of reactive defense from some people of saying, well, this is just my genetics, or I've really worked hard for that, to look a certain way. Because there are those who feel, when we have these conversations, that they're being attacked for being skinny, and then this whole issue of, well, maybe there's skinny shaming as well, and that whole thing comes up. So just actually on that note, what would you say to those who feel that they're attacked for being skinny? Because this is something
Yeah, absolutely. Look, that's been my experience repeatedly over time too, Casey. So yeah, that's a really great place to park the bus. You know, I think I am deeply compassionate to everybody who is a human, who has human experiences. And, you know, it is not unusual, particularly if we identify as women and femmes, that we too have been, you know, drawn into body image difficulties and challenges, and that's part of the genderfication, I guess, of how you know, power structures get enacted in our world. And I try and say "and" as much as possible, because I feel like "but" it kind of negates things. So I want to say "and" to kind of link things together, because we can't kind of disentangle one thing from the other. So, and what tends to happen is that when we're aware of our own kind of defensive responses, or you know, a tendency to maybe shut down, all that is just, it's a cue for us, really. It's just a cue. It's like, ooh, something is something's hitting a nerve here. And if we can stay curious and open-hearted and open-minded to our own defenses and to our own pain points, it really leaves us in a position where we can be so much more compassionate towards our own experiences, and therefore be in a better position to be compassionate towards other people's experiences. So that's the first thing I would say, is that if privilege is brought to your attention, or if harm is brought to your attention, that being super both compassionate towards yourself, you know, is a really powerful way that we can hold space for our own painful experiences, because it can certainly be very painful to be called to attention about some of these things, you know, because as humans, none of us like to be I guess, positioned as the bad person. We all like to think that we're lovely and caring and kind and inclusive, and the truth is that often we're not, really, in ways that are not intentional. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be that, and this is a point I make quite often, is that we need to you know, come to the point where we are able to see that the shaming of bodies is so inequitable. That, you know, thin shaming or skinny shaming, it's not the same thing. It's just not even in the same ballpark. It's not even the same universe. To feel shamed or to feel shame as any human is a rotten feeling. Like, that's a really rotten feeling. And we've all experienced it. And to feel systematically shamed, to feel constantly shamed, to feel excluded from spaces like planes, cinemas, lecture theatres, cafes, because we live in a larger body, that is called systematic oppression. And that is marginalisation and exclusion. And that is not something that people in smaller bodies experience. People in smaller bodies can move around the world actually very easily, and we can still experience some really shitty body image. That is not invalid. That does not mean that doesn't matter. It does matter. And it is completely different to being excluded in the world and being told that, you know, if you have a sore knee, you go to the doctor. A smaller person might be given a referral to a specialist, or might be referred to a physiotherapist or somebody like that. Somebody in a larger body goes to the doctor with a knee problem. They will almost definitely be told to lose weight and be given some shitty ass dietary advice. You know, so this is the difference. It's a social justice issue. It's something that we need to keep talking about, and it's something we need to be really super aware of. And if we want to be doing good in the world, then being aware of how privilege influences the ways that we all show up can be very powerful.
Thank you, Fee. That was awesome. I'm
having my Tara Brach moment. Can I just say, I love her so much. I've just, oh my gosh,
she's legendary.
She is amazing.
Oh, I love it, Fee. I love how you are explaining how smaller bodies simply are not the object of systemic oppression and bias, and at the same time you're not invalidating the the shame and the lived experience of people in those bodies and in all bodies. So thank you for so beautifully just tying that all together. Yes. Okay. I'm going to keep moving along because I'm aware of time and there's so much I want to talk to you about. The working with clients who want to lose weight. What do we do? whether that's a client coming to us for our dietetic services or a yoga student who discloses to us that, part of the reason they wish to start yoga is to lose weight. How do we navigate that? And how do we communicate with someone who, sometimes they really desperately wish to change their body and they're really hoping that will help them? How can we communicate? What do we do and still stay kind of firmly planted in a body acceptance approach?
Yeah, okay. This is probably one of the most common questions I'm asked by, especially by dietitians, because unfortunately, our profession has been positioned as weight loss experts, which deeply saddens me because I've got a 5-year degree, and that's a lot of money I spent to be a weight loss expert, to be like a pseudo kind of Jenny Craig consultant. That is not why I studied, right?
No.
So I think it's a real pity. It breaks my heart actually that we are positioned within broader culture and also within healthcare as well, like doctors. That's what doctors will refer for, and it's like, oh my God, we have got such incredible clinical experience. Like, we know actually a lot about a lot when it comes to food and eating and different body systems and medical care. And that's not to say that there isn't a shit ton to learn, right? We've all got stuff that we can learn. There's all stuff we could do better. And nutrition, food science is not young, really. Food science is very ancient and rooted in a lot of wisdom traditions. But dietetics is very new. So, and we don't defer to wisdom traditions enough, I feel. But that's another conversation case. So, back to your original question, and that is, the first place that I do position myself is not as a weight loss expert, but as somebody who's seeking to understand your experience. So, the first place that I would put my, if you like my soul or my spiritual self or my presence, my sense of presence, that's a better way to say it. I'd be positioning my presence as one that is deeply compassionate. So when I am sitting with somebody who is in distress, they might be in pain, physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, that I am centered and grounded in compassion rather than in fixing mode, which is something that dietitians are. We are so awesome at fixing. No, we're not really. No, we are. No, we're not. I promise you we're not. But we're actually kind of trained to have this kind of fixing mentality, right? Distress, fix it, take away that pain. And unfortunately, when it comes to weight-related and body image pain, physical, emotional pain, that we're just not super skilled at this. But the first thing that I do, coming from a compassionate place, is seek to understand someone's experience and seek to understand their points of distress and validate that. Now, validation does not mean that I'm saying that I'm positioning myself as yes, and I am the person that is going to give you a meal plan or give you a calorie restricted, food groups type of, whatever. Hang on a second, pause. I'm just going to take a few steps back.
Yep.
So I want to position myself as somebody who seeks to understand your experience and validate that experience without falling into the fixing trap and without falling into the trap of, and I will help you do another diet cycle, so to speak. Now, this positioning is actually really tricky. It's very, very tricky, and I don't think I'm perfect at it now, because when we're meeting somebody's distress, it's actually really hard. It brings up a lot of stuff for us too, and that it's very difficult for us to see people disappointed, as well as in pain. So you're adding disappointment to their pain. You might be adding frustration or anger to their pain as well. But in that very first conversation with people, what I'm aiming to do is to help them to share their story in a way that makes sense to them and to me. So I'm encouraging somebody to tell me their story of food, of body, of culture, of eating, and how that has kind of moved across time. Because when we tell our story to others, we actually tell our story to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that makes sense.
It totally does.
Because it is so often the case that somebody is recounting some experiences through childhood and adolescence, and maybe through adulthood as well. And it's clear from the expression on their face or maybe their body language that this is the first time they've heard these words come out of their own mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And that we can't underestimate the power of that. We've got to be super patient, take our time, slow that bus down, and let people tell their stories, because there is a lot of power in hearing the frustration and the sadness and the anger and the loss and the grief, and also the happiness, the excitement, the wish. We will hear so much in someone's story that can help inform us with how to move forward from there. And so using kind of some specific counselling techniques, which, we kind of don't necessarily have time to go into today, but using some specific kind of counselling and guidance techniques, we can help people to come in contact with their story from a compassionate place. And more often than not, people know.
Mm-hmm.
If we're very, very kind, compassionate, and very we can hold a space, people will often come to the realization themselves that, oh, actually what I'm looking for through weight loss is I'm actually looking for more joy, more contentment, more connection, less angst, less struggle. And I think I have been led to believe that I'm going to get this magic bullet through weight loss. And actually, I'm realizing that I have pursued that again and again and again and again, and I still haven't got there, wherever, quote unquote, there is. So I think it's a very powerful thing when we can, take the time to just let people tell their story in a way that makes sense to them and guide very gently, be guiding with that. Then, people are very clever. They often will come to their own conclusions. And some people are like, I get it, and I still want to lose weight. I get it, and I still want to lose weight. And that just requires lots more compassion and kindness and spaciousness, and also requires us to be, very vigilant about being tempted to be giving out specific restrictive dietary advice, which is only going to be enacting more harm. So there you go. In a nutshell, that's what it is.
Oh, that was a good one.
It's not easy. Not easy.
No, it's not easy. And I love how, just that last few sentences from you, how you said, well, even if they have unpacked their story and we've created the space for them to do that and being as compassionate and as non-judgmental and as kind as we can, and they're still looking for weight loss, to hold strong and to just be extra aware of, okay, well, I'm going to keep validating you, and I'm going to stay out of that fixing trap. Just keep staying present, hold strong. So yeah, that's really informative and helpful. Thank you, Fee.
I think the other thing, Case, if it's okay just to add there, is that I don't want to lead people to believe that it's either we just sit there as passive listeners or we give diet plans. Like, that's not the case at all. And you and I both know that there is so much work we can do that does not involve sitting there passive or giving a diet plan. Like, there is literally hundreds of things that a non-diet dietitian can do with somebody who is concerned about their weight, who really wants to lose weight, has done all the diets, is very upset with themselves, there are lots of tools and strategies and ways of understanding our experience that are neither of those things. So I just didn't want to lead people to believe that we're like, hands up in the air. Oh, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to sit here, because there are literally hundreds of things that we can do that are very active, that are very behaviour change focused, and that are evidence-based, most importantly.
Yes. And Fee, I'm wondering if for the listeners, you can just throw out the first things that come to your mind, like what are some of those many things that we as dietitians can do that is not just sitting on our hands and is also not just doling out another diet cycle plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So if just say our goal, or so to speak, just say our goal for this person is increasing awareness of eating patterns, let's just say. So and this brings together, our mindfulness practice and a bit from yoga philosophy as well. If people are interested in yoga, I say to them, I'm a yoga teacher as well. I'm not talking about down dog here on the floor, but what I am talking about is, tell me about the elements of yoga that we might be able to bring in with regards to, to noticing our experience, or, offering ourselves choice, or, when to move forward, when to move back, when to challenge, when to rest, all this stuff we can bring together. Things like, an awareness of body sensations. How aware am I of body sensations? I know when I need to go to the toilet, but do I know when I'm hungry? Do I know when I'm full? Do I know when I'm thirsty? And if so, how does that feel in the body? Like, what I will often say to people is, how does hunger feel to you? If you were to describe to me in terms of texture, color, sound, location, temperature, and I don't just mean super hungry, I mean maybe even a little bit hungry. Like, how does that feel in your body? So if we're trying to create awareness, we might be looking at hunger and fullness awareness, or satiety cues, or we might be looking at, like I said before, like eating patterns. Am I eating regularly in the day? And do you know what most often I ask is, I wonder if you're eating enough. And more often than not, people who run around thinking, I'm just going to use numbers here for a second, Casey, people who run around thinking that 1,500 calories a day is enough for a grown-ass human, oh my God, you dreaming. That is not nearly enough.
Nope.
It's not nearly enough.
Not even
And people
close.
are like, not even close. And I'm like, so if people are talking about, I don't mind talking about numbers with people if it's in the service of healing. So, we can talk about, how we can feed and fuel ourselves more sufficiently. If I'm working with somebody who is from, for example, an Eastern European background, and they've really lost contact with that, then, talking about, how can we bring your culture back in with regards to, food and eating, rather than having sandwiches for lunch. It was very Anglo. Sorry, that's a very whitewashed Anglo-centric kind of lunch. Does it feel, in Eastern European traditions, hot lunches are the thing. How would that feel? And then I've had so many people say, oh my gosh, I used to do that as a child. That feels so good. I'm like, yes, exactly. The body knows. So, I mean, that's just a small smattering of examples.
Oh, yes. I'm just like fist pumping the air. Oh, yeah. Thank you. There really are so many things that we can do. And I just want to say, I come across that I wonder if you're eating enough thing a lot as well. 1,500 calories. Just no. That's
just no.
Minnesota starvation study level. It's
yes.
just not, it's not enough. Not enough. Okay. Fee, I'm aware of time. I've got so much else that I want to ask you, but I'm going to try to be disciplined and bring it down to just one or two last questions. I'm just wondering, Fee, you are the mindful dietitian. Mindfulness is obviously huge right now, and it's defined in different ways depending on context and setting. But I particularly love how you describe mindfulness, and I'm gonna read a bit of one of your blogs, if that's okay with you.
Go for it. Yep.
your blog, Mindfulness, Mindful Action, and the Pervasive Culture of Niceness. I just really loved your definition of mindfulness, especially in regards to less pleasant emotions like anger and sadness. So this is from your blog. Mindfulness offers us powerful ways to come into contact with our experiences as they are happening, which invite us to consciously utilize our energy. Let's take an example. Mindfulness does not say, if you notice you are angry, try breathing into it so you are less angry. The world does not want to see you angry. That is not mindfulness. That is patriarchy, and it's extremely harmful, particularly to women and marginalized people.
Yes.
So, awesome. Can you talk a little bit about the phenomenon that occurs when mindfulness is confused with niceness?
Yes. Haha, with pleasure. You know what's so funny, and I'm sure you have this experience too, Casey. You read something that you have written, perhaps a couple of years before, or somebody, puts something on social media and quotes you, and you're like, God, that was good. How did I come up with that? I must have had some brainwave moment in the shower, which is where I have all my best thoughts, in the shower with no pen and paper, of course.
Of course.
But of course. So, okay. Now, I wanted to add something here to make this a bit of a tripod, and that is mindfulness, kindness, and niceness. So they are, I guess, mindfulness, the way I see it, is a vehicle to understand a little bit more about how niceness and kindness get confused, and how this is all bound up in power structures. So, one of the things I've noticed is that, when we consider mindfulness as per wisdom traditions, as opposed to the more psychological modern construct of mindfulness, I think we notice a few differences there. I just wanted to start there. And that is that in the wisdom traditions, mindfulness encourages us to come into contact, as I said in my blog, with experiences as they're happening, with conscious awareness, curiosity, and non-judgment, but doesn't say anything about what we're paying attention to. So it doesn't direct us. It says to it all. Whereas I find that in more modern kind of psychology mindfulness, it's like, it's awareness of our experiences and then what to do about it. Do you know what I mean? So awareness of, anger, and then how to be less angry, awareness of sadness and how to be less sad, how to be, awareness of our anxiety and how to be less anxious. It's always followed by and what to do about that thing that we don't want. So this is the issue I have with modern mindfulness. And not everybody's doing it. I love the work of, for example, John Kabat-Zinn or Dan Siegel. They don't, or Tara Brach, for example. They really honour, the wisdom traditions. But what happens is that, especially where it comes to niceness and kindness and how that's caught up in power structures, is that being nice is inequitably something that is expected of women and femmes. This is a very gendered type of idea that, we're expected to be congenial and open-hearted and open-minded and just nice, kind of bow down to things and be always pleasant and accommodating and all those things that apparently nice girls do. And so when we do inevitably get angry or upset or frustrated or anything from that kind of family of emotions, people get very upset, particularly men.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly men, let's face it. It's like, oh, that's not very nice. And sometimes it's actually other women, because we have internalized patriarchy as well, right? Where if we see anger in other women, we can be like, whoa, 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 that's not very nice. It's not very nice.
How nasty.
And I hear, right, and I hear parents say it to their little girls, that's not very nice. And I think to myself, no, she's allowed to be pissed. Let her be pissed. Let her express, that anger. And so I guess I'm a big fan of kindness. I'm a big fan of compassion. And the core of what I like to talk about when it comes to kindness and compassion is it doesn't always come dressed up in a nice stripy box with a glittery package. Actually, sometimes it comes in a big box of rage.
Yep.
And that can be kindness.
Yeah.
Do you know? Like it can be kindness, and compassion is not always, the image of me sitting on a meditation cushion, being all serene and smiling at you.
Mm-hmm.
That is not always what kindness and compassion looks like and sounds like and feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the most compassionate thing I can do for myself is to say, get up and do something.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can edge on being demanding and not very nice, actually. There you go. I said it. I said the word. And it can be demanding and not very, not showing awareness of my own limitations.
Mm.
So I think we need to stop confusing the two things.
Totally. And that feels really spacious. As you say that, it feels like we just keep coming back to this spaciousness. But I just love it. When mindfulness is confused as niceness and we forget the kindness element.
Yep.
I've fallen into that trap,
Oh my God, same.
I still have moments where I'm thinking, well, I'm a yoga teacher, so I'm meant to be so-called mindful in air quotes and quietly smiling and patient and always have the right words to say and never raise your voice. And this is all nice, right? I mean, like we need yoga teachers, like it's like we need to be even nicer than women and femmes are conditioned and trained from birth to be, which is already ridiculously nice. So yeah, I do try to break out of that box, and just be mindful, but not necessarily nice. And sometimes I'll swear in my yoga classes and I'll talk about things that aren't all wonderful. If a student or a client asks me about my opinions on keto or wellness wankery or dodgy diets, popularized in yoga culture, for instance, I will express those opinions, and they're not always nice opinions.
Yes, exactly.
And a part of me still sometimes worries that as I'm saying that, I'm going to hurt or offend some people, or people won't like me. So dismantling patriarchy, dismantling diet culture whilst navigating my own conditioning to be a good, nice little girl, it's still a work in progress. I'm still working at it.
Oh, yeah. I think it's lifelong, to be honest.
Yeah.
I really do. I really think it's a life's journey.
Okay, cool. So I've got my whole life. That's reassuring. Oh, wow. Okay, Fee, we are probably over the hour now, but I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you've spoken about with me today. There was so much more I wanted to get to, but maybe we'll just have to save it for another podcast episode. In finishing up, Fee, I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to add that you think the listeners would benefit from hearing.
Do you know what? I just feel I feel very satisfied with actually what we have spoken about. We've touched lots of different edges, and I'm feeling really satisfied and settled with what we've spoken about. So I'm super happy just to leave it where we've left it.
Beautiful. Yes. Very satisfying. It's like having a delicious, very satisfying meal. That's what that just felt like. So
yes.
Thank you. Fiona, where can people find you? Because I'm sure they're going to be definitely wanting to find you if they haven't already.
Okay, so you can find me at The Mindful Dietitian, which is www.themindfuldietitian.com.au. Just remembering that a dietitian is spelled Dietition, not with a C. Or I'm pretty active on Instagram as well, which is, gosh, I know I'm very, very creative. So that's at The Mindful Dietitian.
Perfect.
Yeah. And then we also have a closed Facebook group for health at every size aligned health professionals, and yoga teachers are more than welcome if you're curious about hearing more about, what we kind of talk about in that group. It's lots of interesting and fun discussions that go on there. That is also The Mindful Dietitian. So that's where you can find me.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Fiona. I absolutely love chatting with you anytime we catch up, even if it's only on, rare or special occasions when I can arrange babysitting and get to the big smoke to do one of your fabulous workshops. So thank you for today, and thank you for being such a force of non-diet wisdom and fire in the world.
You are more than welcome. Thank you. It was such a pleasure to chat with you, Case. Thank you.
Thank you for being here and for straddling the tricky edges of yoga land and diet culture with me. I hope this podcast encourages you to compassionately and continuously question the ways that contemporary yoga is unfolding and interacting with other big forces in the world, to develop a discerning mind and open heart, and to skillfully dodge the diet BS that often comes along with studio culture. Like you, I'm eager to keep learning and sharing, and I put all relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, online nutrition counselling services, and lots more at funkyforest.com.au. While you're there, make sure to download my free ebook, A Modern Yogi's BS-Free Guide to Wellbeing. It's a light-hearted, easy read with my top 6 tips on dodging diet culture crap in the yoga world, whilst creating sustainable and balanced health from the inside out. If you love the podcast, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/non-dietyogi. There are some pretty rad rewards there, such as exclusive content, discount codes, giveaways, and the ability to chat with me. As more episodes roll out, I'll be adding even more fun bonuses, such as my non-diet yogi cookbook and mini courses. You can access most of the goodies at the lowest level, which is just $2 US a month, or around $2.90 Australian dollars. Like most mamas, I'm ridiculously busy parenting, working, studying, and all the rest. I've recorded a bunch of episodes, and some of these have required 5 separate takes just to get a whole episode done, as I need to wake up before my little ones to do it, and they get up very early. So I'm crossing my fingers that the Patreon will give me the financial capacity to keep doing this. Another way to support is to head over to iTunes and subscribe and review the podcast. That would be so awesome. Thank you. The in and outro song is Evening Glow by John Anderson. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time.